Welcome to yet another new Z33 product. Today we're going to tackle the Z33 350z G35 V35 solid aluminum steering rack bushings. What do you get in the box? Well, you get a clamshelled circle of aluminum, two mushroom cap style aluminum bits that fit at the front, and these Lego Man top looking hat ones that go at the back. But we'll show you where these go in just a few. Before you start, make sure your steering rack is centered by moving it so the steering wheel is up and the lines align. Neat trick, huh? Now hire your own version of OctoZac, because he's ours, and remove the cross brace bolts as well as the cross brace itself. You will then need to drop your FLCA off the studs, then remove the steering angle kit from both sides. Do this by removing the main nut and bolt as well as the two on the sides. Now let that drop out of the way. To be helpful for later, mark the rack to the U-joint, then mark the U-joint to the steering shaft so everything lines back up beautifully when you reinstall it later. Now loosen the U-joint bolt, then head down and loosen and remove the lower U-joint bolt down there. Next, remove the spring clamp, then loosen and remove the soft line, making sure to catch dem fluids. You don't want to make a mess now, do you? Head back up after cleaning up the mess you did make and loosen the hardline fitting next door. Now loosen the steering rack bolts, pull both of those off, and head to the other side of the rack. Now loosen and remove both of those bolts as well. Now remove the entire rack off the car and onto your favorite workstation. Let's get to work removing the hard lines that are in the way of the install. Start with the long one, then the short, then both of them on the other side. Easy peasy. Set those aside gently and in a safe spot. You don't want to sit on one and bend it, I promise. Now head to your favorite press and press out the first of the old haggard bushings. Flip the rack around and press the other side out as well. Toss them things in the trash in loving memory of Kobe, then grab your frosty new Gktech mushroom looking bushing and install that to the side we're showing here with the fitting ports looking at you. Flip and repeat the process for the other side. Now flip the entire rack over and install the Lego Man hat looking bushings onto both sides of the rack as shown here. Wow. Look at that, would ya? These are the locators, and these are not. Smexy. Let's toss those lines back in you didn't ruin by sitting on. Start with the short one, which goes in the port closest to you, then thread it on and tighten it down. Now move on to threading in the long one and tightening that one down as well. Your rack is now reassembled and a slop-free version of the rack it was 29.5 minutes ago. Let's slap it back in, shall we? To install, whilst lifting the rack back in, line up the U-joint to the steering rack and slide her on in. Then toss the U-joint bolt in and get it finger tight. Now seat the rack in the subframe and slip the bolts through, but don't tighten them down just yet. Move on to the other side and install your fresh clamshell bushings, then the bracket, and then the two bolts. Get those finger tight as well. Now hand tighten the hardline fitting, and this is why we left the rack loose. It may be hard to tighten if the rack was fully clamped. Now move on to tightening the rack bolts down, then move to the other side and do the same. Now go back to the first side and torque them johnnies down to 130 Newton meters or 96 foot-pounds. We're doing this so the rack tightens evenly. Now on the other side, torque those down to a bit less at 69 Newton meters or 51 foot-pounds. Now head up to the lower U-joint bolt and torque that to 23 to 29 Newton meters or 18 to 21 foot-pounds. Then move on to the upper one, torquing those down to the same settings as well. At this point, it's time to tighten up the hard line. Then move on to threading in and tightening down the soft line as well. Finally, moving the spring clamp back to its home where it's happy again. Move on to installing the steering kit on both sides of the car. Install the side bolts, then the main nut and bolt. Then tighten all of those down and torque to the specs shown on the screen. Next, pop the LCA back up onto the studs on both sides, insert the insert, then move right along to the cross brace, bringing OctoZac back once again to get all of those snug, then to torque them down to the specs shown on the screen. Big numbers are for the big nuts and bolts, and the smaller numbers are for the smaller nuts and bolts. It just makes sense, people. Now move topside for the final step and refill your system with power steering fluid, and that's it. Your rack will now have much less flex than your last Instagram post, for sure. We promise we'll make these end clips different someday. Today is not that day. If you can't install these, have a pro do it, or reach out with any questions. This has been Officer Dan, Johnny Caps, and Get Smacked Zach with another Gktech How To. Peace.